The theme for this afternoon talk is the significance of the middle way. 2,600 years ago, Gautama Siddhartha, recently awakened, made the walk from Bodh Gaya in Bihar, North India, for around 200 kilometers through to Saranath. Saranath is several kilometers outside Varanasi, the world's oldest pilgrimage center. And in the village of Saranath, the yogis would stay. They're engaging in a variety of rather austere practices. Meeting with his friends there in Saranath, he gave a talk. The general thread and theme of the talk is of extreme relevance for human beings far and wide. And the core feature of it is the observation through experience and clarity that all too frequently human beings are engaged in two extreme forms of activity. And one of those is the affirmation, self-obsession, the building up of oneself. The identity, the holding on to the self to build it up. And this activity preoccupies our hearts, minds, lives, year in, pardon me, and year out. And the other, which is the swing in the opposite direction, human beings are frequently engaged in putting ourselves down. The rejection, self-rejection, the blame, the fault-finding, the feeling not being good enough. So the outcome of that is that there is a swinging, so to speak, backwards and forwards between trying to build ourselves up into the field of self-importance and finding ourselves struggling and with difficulty through the putting of ourselves down. The middle way is the radical, fresh alternative to living in those extremes. So the body of that teaching, which flowed on afterwards, keeps faith with that. And that's what I'd like to speak to you a little bit during the course of this talk. In relationship to this exploration of the middle way, there are a variety of ways that this can be addressed. And sometimes in the culture that we live in a variety of polarities, fragmentations, distortions of the perception, in which, as I mentioned, we swing backwards and forward between one way or the other. This leaves us with little peace of mind, little wisdom, and little clarity. So first, let's just address for a few moments the building of ourselves up. There is a very strong encouragement in the society towards this. It shows a lack of clarity and wisdom, if I may say. And the way that we do that so often is we engage in activities. The self has a strong investment in the outcome of those activities. And the intentionality behind all of that is that which we do, that which we engage in. It's important for us, yes, it's important we feel for others, and there is a wish for the affirmation. There is a wish for the outcome of this to provide us with a sense that we are somebody and we are important there. But this view also carries with it, it's not clean, it often carries with it other intentionalities. We need proof. We need confirmation that we are successful. We need confirmation that we have achieved and accomplished something. And the way that we do that in the material world and in society is through two primary ways. One of those ways to accumulate the sense of being self-important is, of course, the affirmation of other people. We are reliant on her or his, their view of us, and that helps us to feel good about ourselves that we have achieved and we have accomplished. But in an obsessive and rather mentally ill society that we are living in, that there is so much comparison, there is so much competitiveness there, that others will reject others in order to feel good about themselves. And so the reaching out and the dependency on other women and men on this earth for confirmation and affirmation is risky. It leaves us very, very vulnerable, and that vulnerability either comes through the person rejecting what we say or what we do, or the way we are, or the person shows no interest, they withdraw from us, they pull out their energies from us, and of course we're dissatisfied with that because we're not getting that affirmation, that confirmation, that appreciation that we so desperately seek. What a way to live. What a way to live, dependent on the states of mind of others for us to feel good about ourselves. Is it any wonder there is depression? Is it any wonder there is unhappiness, confusion, feelings of failure, dissatisfaction, when the consciousness, as it were, you, me or other, is leaning, doing things in order to receive, in order to get something back? And in that movement it's still not clean, because in that movement that goes on with that, for some, may not be here, but all too often, is the intention with that movement to get affirmation. A proof of it is in materialism. Consumerism essentially is for those people who essentially have actual lack of self-worth. They do not feel good about themselves, and the outcome of that, the only way to do it is to have more. It's the means to fill the gap inside of oneself, that one is somebody, by more possession and more ownership. That gap cannot be filled, obviously, through that, and one only has to dig a little bit into the privileged, wealthy elite and into the middle classes and others, and to see, wow, the dissatisfaction, the stress, the unhappiness, and the accumulation of goods and the acquisition of them around oneself will not make a human being feel good. But we've been sold this package. The intensity of the individualism, of the propaganda to make us feel good by being somebody, by being rich, by having more, is so intense that when youngsters, teenagers in the West were asked what is it they most want in life, and the answer was primarily 87% to be rich. This is the level of mental sickness. And no offer is no inspiration, no understanding in the culture, very little, of what the middle way is. And is it any wonder that those intent on career, intent on money, intent on ownership, intent of the approval for others, keep finding again and again the doubts coming in. Keep finding at the other end of the spectrum, so to speak, that there is a feeling of failure, not being good enough, should try harder, should do more, and then I can be successful. And parents are contributing to destroying the lives of their children with this ideology. Parents have to have a really rethink, as well as us as adults, a real re-examination of what is the core messages I'm putting out to these children, and have I bought in naively and foolishly into the idea and the model of what success is. It ain't no success. And that swing can be so severe. That means on the end of the lack of self-worth and the despair and the unhappiness which can come for some people. It can be so severe for people, both younger and older people. It leads to chronic anxiety, chronic self-doubt, lack of self-worth, sometimes to self-harming, suicidal thoughts and more. So somewhere between this affirmation of the self and the rejection of it and thinking one is going to resolve the other, somewhere we have to find the middle ground and the middle way between these two there. It's an immense undertaking, of course it is, but what we're being offered is not working. It is simply not working. And the whole system is based on this winners and losers, success and failure, those who are better off and those who are worse off. Whoa. It's going to need a lot of questioning, a lot of inquiry, a lot of inner and outer change, because it cannot go on this medieval way of thinking. And sometimes there's the privilege and the pleasure and joys in life with those affirmations and building oneself, putting oneself down, refining and have connection with people who have another way of being, and perhaps possibly there's the opportunity to really learn from such people and in a whole variety of situations. When we look to ourselves here, the vigilant aspect here, as always, with the self, and in the Western language we might call it ego, and sometimes we think of ego as inflating our self-importance as a kind of definition of ego. But in the ancient teaching, it is just as much ego in putting oneself down as building oneself up. And the Pali or Sanskrit word in this case rather expresses that rather precisely. And the word is aham, which is I, kara, activity. So the frequency of thinking and the frequency of use of the language of I there is aham kara. Therefore it is ego building. And this relationship or this activity of ego building, as I say, putting things up, it doesn't take much. It's like a house of cards, the building up. Take one card out and the whole thing can collapse. You can have the best job in the world, the best partnership in the world, you can have the best health in the world. It only takes a moment. It only takes no from somebody else. It only takes a small change in one's physical sickness circumstances and all that one has cherished and held and built up. Suddenly, whoa, there's the crash. Doesn't take much. It's the vulnerable world in, it's not a picnic. And therefore, in that which we engage in, and we have the opportunity here to engage in some valuable and important reflection. This valuable and important reflection, one aspect of this would be to recognize and acknowledge where at this time in my life is the most frequent use of the concept of I. Just let's start with that. Where in my life is the most frequent use of the concept of I? And that may be in just one or two areas. Quite often, the area, understandably, humanly enough, will be around a particular role. You're a mother, you're a father, you're a brother, you're a sister, family members, or whatever. So the I may, for some, engage a great deal in that. That also, in the I, when it's under pressure, cannot see clearly, there's not a chance of it seeing clearly, so it can be, I'm taking the family dynamic for the moment, it can be that the I is under pressure, and when it is under pressure, the I will have in it somewhere some desire. It has to. And the desire, that means the wanting, could be the wanting for him or her or us or whatever to be different from the way that it is. The pressure, I want you to change, I want you to be different, you are making the family life difficult, or whatever it might be, or it might be in the workplace or whatever. So the self, under the pressure, which is called the wanting, called the desiring, the needing, the craving, generates the pressure. And the pressure can land on the others. It can land on the children, it can land on the partner, it can land on the neighbours, or work colleagues, or whatever. We really need to notice the I where it is under pressure and it is demanding. There is no wisdom in it. It's control. It's unhappy for the person who is on the receiving end of these demands, which can go on. And the ego, that's the I-making activity, very easily we have the view in the I-making activity, I am right. That is arrogance. It's more than conceit, it's arrogance. And we can't listen, we can't connect. There's a lack of empathy for the other because one is holding to the view, I know I am right. And that message, no matter what the content is, one might be technically, psychologically, mentally interpreting it correctly, but the self, with the pressure, with the demand that's going, even if it's, as it were, right what you and I say, the pressure and the demand on the other, that is what will be the residue impression. You and I, we can speak till the cows come home in terms of stating facts. Facts are clearly, they're important, but they are only effective when love and clarity and empathy is carried with them. But when they're carried with this ego, with this wanting mind, is it surprising that the person does not want to listen anymore and leaves you? They're fed up with your facts. And therefore the heartfulness, the communications there. And just on a side note, there is much conversations going on, women and men friends in the Sangha, for some people, about the ethics of bringing babies into this world. And in some of the sharings and communications, I'm speaking here as a teacher and as a father as well, that there are two kind of explorations in this area. Personally, I regard both as valid and important. So there are people, women, men, whose heart and biology genuinely wishes to bring a baby and children into the world. There's a beautiful expression of our love for life and to bring human life into this vast field of existence, in spite of all that we know in terms of numbers and resources and so forth. But it will require from parents, with children, from all of us, with grandchildren, from all of us, completely fresh ways of what it is to be a parent. We may have some insights and benefits from our parents, we may. And what I mean by that, we can reflect on the past when we are here. We can see with love and gratitude and appreciation for the sacrifices and the services that our parents may have given to us, and which nourished our being there, and that's valuable. We may also recognize, shall we call it politely, the weak spots of our parents. We have the opportunity to reflect on this And the outcome of all of that, which was unsatisfactory, which wasn't healthy, wasn't wise or skillful, there is some resolve to change. And therefore some of us looked at our parents, we saw what we appreciated, we recognized and remembered what we didn't, and we quietly made the resolve for something different. But it's still not enough. It's still not enough, even if one's pretty clear about the old. We're still trying to find some clear middle ground. And what I mean by that in this case is that we look at this world around us and there is unsatisfactory, undue pressure of control over the children. And this is going to require parents to actually give support and care for the children and to find, nourish their play, their freedom, their joy to life, because our children are being taken over by the system. And more and more constraint into the classroom, less and less play. I don't know how it is here, but just last week, my two grandchildren, one age 10, one age 12, with the father, co-parenting. My daughter's the primary parent, and the father takes the children, lovely guy, are going off on December the 12th for 8 days, 7 or 8 days to Egypt for a holiday there. Because the two children are going out of school for that period of time, both parents are being fined £60 each per week per child. £60 is $120. The school is fining them for taking the children out to have a break, to be with their father and his other son from a second family. So it's just the father, full week, great week for the three kids with their dad in Egypt, and they're fined for it. That's how rotten the system is. And similarly, when I brought my grandson here to Australia, he was about their age, around about 10 years of age. This is several years ago. It was the same situation there. And it took a lot of work to ensure, because I said he's coming for 4 weeks, and the head said he cannot leave this school for 4 weeks. And I said, oh yes he can. Not only can he will. You don't have any choice about it. The mother has agreed, I have agreed, father's okay, and we're going. It was a transformative, he still says, my grandson, now 19 in January, it was a transformative experience of his whole life, was the weeks here in Australia. It just opened up his world there, and he still speaks of it as the most important. And the school wanted to deprive him of the opportunity. Tragic this system is. Keeping them in the classroom morning, noon and night, and the blindness of the opportunity to find that, not to have a holiday for pleasure, not to be trapped in the classroom and all the confinement of it, but the middle ground of exploration, middle ground for the experience of being in the forest and being out in the nature and listening to the teachings. And I remember we were, just very quickly here, we were in Yadahapani, and some of the men and women knew the forest well. They were taking the youngster out kangaroo hunting, which they found, and snakes and wallabies and possums and etc. And the boy just had his eyes opened with all of this, and he's seen his granddad with the talk. So we were in a rather large place called Yadahapani. Some of you may have been there with us several years ago. So he said, I really want to thank everybody for all the kindness that was offered. And I said, yes, sure. So he walked over, and then he said, oh, Granddad, where's the microphone? You know, There's a certain confidence. And when he'd finished, we have it recorded, and when he'd finished speaking, he said, "Any questions?" But that's my grandson. So sometimes in the dynamics of life, we find something not about ego, putting ourselves down. It's actually finding genuinely some middle ground. Of course, as I mentioned before, it's not always easy there. And just going back to the point with the parenting role, some of my friends, women and men friends, said, we have made the decision there that not to have children there, and our intention is to bring more love into the world. So there are some who, as parents, as mothers and fathers, have that intention to bring more love into the world and the children, and to find ways for their happiness, their play, their joyfulness, the vibrancy of their life, and to really endorse and encourage that. And others are making the decision, it's a conscious decision there, to bring love into the world and just to make that primary without being parents. And a credit to both. In the exploration, pardon me, in the exploration of this middle ground and middle way, there are other ways as well that we can look at it. Not so much in the extremes, but in the practicalities here. What I have in mind, you could say, the middle way is the living present, and one side of the living present is the past, and the other side of it is the future. We could regard that with the freedom to explore the relationship to what was and the relationship to what might be. And that relationship, in this case, to what was, is the ability to recognize what we see and appreciate, and to draw on the wealth of experience that we have in a whole variety of areas. It's so valuable at times. Our life is so often kind of moving on from things to the next things so quickly. We might be missing the opportunity, not for nostalgia purposes, but just to look back and say, what did I learn from this? What were the insights? What can I draw from this experience to bring into the next experience? Because if we don't, we miss an opportunity for some real learning, or we haven't moved on from, and in not moving on from a situation, we will drag it along with us. The shock will drag it along. If it's not resolved, it will drag along. Put it in the Eastern language, it will have its karmic consequences. Yeah. So it's quite a task to be reasonably well grounded and centered in the present. Regard that, shall we say, as a feature of the middle way, with the freedom to look to yesterday and to tomorrow. Have a sip of the old water. I was enjoying as the 3:15, 3:25 time, standing on the veranda outside my room there, and one of the good team or staff here at Sang Soon has put a bath bowl, and the birds would come on the bath and look in, and then head first, it's only a small bowl, head first were diving in, pulling your head out. Wow, this is great. Diving in again. Did it several times. Then this bird went on the branch and shaking the body and letting the sun dry the body. Another bird spotted it, that looks pretty good. And another bird would come and land and do the same kind of process. These things, these beautiful moments, we cannot buy. They are the gifts out of the nature. We've got to keep our eyes and ears open. And if our life can be receptive to the countless situations which touch us with joy, such as those small experiences, that consumerism is going to diminish so much in importance, because we realize it's not any kind of substitute for the natural joys of life, and that we find, and that is an expression of the middle way. It comes to us. It's like a gift of the gods, some might say, and to be touched and to be receptive to that, and so that the pleasures of life, nourishing food, music, a variety of sights, certain comforts and things, we can acknowledge and appreciate them. Of course, there's not much of the pleasure of life to recognize, but we know there is no demand for it at all. We know much happiness can be without the demand on things, and goods, and money, and success, or whatever. It's just not the priority, because something else is valid and insightful for us. In the exploration of this area of the middle way, quite often with the inner and the outer for a moment or two, in a way, because the culture, the society, is a worldwide phenomenon, of course, of the duality. And in this case, the duality is the separation of one thing from the other. It is a primary, constant viewpoint. So, in it as a primary, constant viewpoint, as they say, as you get off the underground train in London, mind the gap. That's the best thing that's ever come out of London Underground. Mind the gap. So, the idea, I don't buy the idea, but the idea, that everybody is the same, to me it's such a blanket stereotype kind of image. It just doesn't sit well, and it tends to avoid or neglect the value of all the diversity. The idea as well that we are all one genuinely can be helpful experiences, can help to lower the ego. We have a sense of the oneness of life. I would put that, valuable and important as it is, as one of the modest stepping stones to deep realization, but it's not the ultimate truth of things. And so we may have these experiences of the gap, big separations between us, between the nation state and the other, between family, the person who is close to us. There is the gap there. Mind the gap. And what that means in this particular case of minding the gap, human beings, sometimes we require space around us. There's a gap, there is space. There can be real appreciation for that space, which is with us and between us. So there is a sense, it's only a sense, there's no ultimate truth in it, of the self and the other, and there is some space. The poet Rilke, bless him, in his letters to the young poet, speaking of this, asked the young poet a very deep and profound question. Can we love the space between us? Can we love the space between us? So in the relationship, this is called the self to the other, me and the other, or whatever that may be, we know when the gap is got too wide because of the suffering in the mind. There is a gap. We're not all the same. We're not all one. Not like life is not like that. Useful experiences, but it's not the truth of things. So in the gap, plenty of times we can love the gap. There, we say we give each other the space. There's kindness and empathy. We're not blaming or attacking. We're not withdrawing. We know we're not the same. There's much to be shared, and it's appropriate to find that gap. In that gap, the other one person, the partner, may say, I really need to go on a retreat. So the gap's a bit bigger for a while, but it's only a time and space gap. And the partner says, oh, please go, please go. I'll pay your fare, whatever, get the Dharma, whatever, etc. So there's an appreciation which is there. And the exploration of relationships, one aspect of that is appreciation there, and it's a middle ground, so it's not so controlling, to give one another more space. And to recognize the differences there, to be very supportive in the caring kind of way. It is precious, it is important. But when the gap is growing due to the reaction of oneself to the other, that's when it really minds the gap. And that can show itself, as mentioned, with blame and negativity, with fear and resentment, with disinterest and coldness and much, much more. And that gap, when that begins to widen, the image of the other and her or his or their image of oneself, the communication between two people in the real world has stopped. And it's been replaced with a false world, and the false world is relating to the image of each other, the picture we have of each other, the idea of who the other is. And we think and we believe that we are relating to the real of the other. We're not. We're relating to the stereotype, or the image, or the idea, or the belief of the other. And the middle way is grounded in the real, in the authentic. And that would mean for us, as an exploration, if, let's say, you have a difficult conversation with another, it's hard to imagine going through life without difficult conversation. If you know anybody who's gone through life without difficult conversation, please send them to me. I'll be on my knees bowing in front of them, etc. So life embraces the difficult. There can be the Buddhas of the Buddha, you'll still have difficult conversations. This is life. As I said yesterday, get real about it. There's no room for the romanticism in all of this. So what I have in mind here is, you have a difficult conversation, doesn't matter who it is. And the conversation takes place, and at some point, it comes to its end. The ending of the conversation is and the moments afterwards, is as significant and as critical as the communication itself. Because at the end of it, it will leave the residue of an impression. And what is that impression? And if that impression has ego in it, that means holding, desire, fixed view, and shaping the mind, as it were, around that view, that impression will be carried, and when you meet her or him again the next time, you will not be able to see the person. All that will be seen is the arising of the memory of the image of what this person is like. And so much may have gone on in that person's life between now and then. That person may still be the same, but the image lands upon, gets in the way, in the view of the other, and they'll probably pick it up. They will probably feel judged before they've even opened their mouth, and there'll be a contraction. Carrying around a picture image of the other is living in self-image. Middle way is free from those extremisms. And as I said, it's a real practice. Taking the small example, difficult conversation, can I just quietly breathe in and out when it's finished? Not hold to that picture and image, not decide this is who the person is, and therefore remember, this is what happened in the communication today. So that there is space again, which then allows, keeping in touch with the authentic and the real, to move and be receptive, and possibly, no guarantee of course, of the communication with the other. So always with the middle way, swatching ego building up and putting down, giving a little extra care and attention to today, while respectful to yesterday and tomorrow. It's an exploration in the interest of the self and other, and finding that space there. That space is the middle way between the extremes of self and other. Fill the space. And sometimes in a communication with the other, if we can just remember to see the space around her and him, have some space around her, and engage in such a way that the listening power is really present, and there is a real sense that there is the space there for the listener. In one of the well-known communications, it's worth bearing a rather insightful one. This is with regard to the Buddha. But just before I mentioned that in the world of suffering, I'm just talking about it, everyday issues, problems, and unresolved in everyday circumstances, which is where this is applying. There are some who will say, this unhappiness, this anxiety, this worry, this depression, this agitation, or whatever it might be about, I have brought it upon myself. And some will hold to that viewpoint, and sometimes that viewpoint is strongly put out there. Don't buy it. The myth. The self is still in its conceited form. I create my own suffering, I brought it upon myself. Self can't do that. So then some will say, oh no, it's not me, it's her or him or whatever, and they make me suffer, they make me unhappy, they make me worried, they make me anxious, it's their behaviour and this is having such an impact. So it can shift from oneself to the other, and therefore make the other responsible. And it's all part of the regularity and the frequency of the story, and the regularity and the frequency of this story has generated every act of violence and war and abuse on this world. Through a single belief system that you cause me suffering, I cause myself suffering, or sometimes we both have caused it. We're both responsible. And then that becomes another formation of the view. And there's sometimes some maturity and wisdom. We've made our life difficult for each other, etc., whatever that might be. Then the fourth, I'm speaking from the conversation that the Buddha had with the yogi on this. And the fourth one is the attempt to take it out of the field of responsibility, so to speak, of oneself, other, or both. And then it moves into the metaphysics. The metaphysics well, in the generalized language, oh, it's just karma. It's the will of God. Another one. It's our fate. It's destiny. It was just meant to happen. It's just life. So these lovely, oh, it was accidental. It was destiny. So these kind of views easily get produced because it's difficult to say self, other, both, or neither. These are the four possibilities. So then the yogi obviously said, well, if it's not self, other, both, or neither, there's still suffering. What's generating it? And if through not putting it into the box of the self, or the big self, G-O-D and all the other ones, there, it is a not seeing. It is a not understanding, not being aware of. No self, that means no person is to be blamed and attacked for this there. And if we, with some humility in our life, whether there is an issue or a conflict, and we don't want to be in the extremes, it's you or me or both in those, and we want to look and explore what the middle ground is to all of this. What is it we don't understand? What is it that isn't being seen? Because it's very, very easy to blame the other or blame the self. And if we keep the self and blame out of the picture, there's some opportunity to look really in a fresh way, really fresh way. We're not conditioned. We see the falseness of this self-other as a kind of extreme standpoint to take. And that then, once again, can open up the space for a completely fresh way of looking, because we want to understand something, not blame. Right. Time's rolling by here. In some situations, when we have an experience and sense of kind of swinging backwards and forwards between things, and one of the extremes, once again, and you know it's an extreme, it's very simple, when a situation is yes or no, and you can't make your mind up. It's yes or no, and you can't make your mind up. It's called a nightmare. And therefore, there is a fragmentation in the being. Yes, I should say yes to this, but maybe I shouldn't. I should say no. And there is a movement in the extreme, which is an imprisonment of the being to either of these views, and of course it can be paralyzing. I can't make up my mind. And then you make the awful mistake of asking your friends for advice. And then comes out the tragedy of the first words, which is another myth. If I were you, well, you're not, but anyway, if I were you, I would. And sometimes the friend, I don't know why we even call them friends, but the friend there then offers another possibility, which is tragic, because it was bad enough with two ideas in conflict. Now there are three, so then you go and ask another friend. You might end up completely confused. It was bad enough two, now it's up to 5 or 6, etc. And one thinks, this is another part of the mythology, I have to choose. the I just loves itself so much. I have to choose. I have to make a decision. The very pressure, I have to choose, I have to make a decision. That pressure, when the pressure drops, it will swing over to the opposite kind of view. It has to. I'm really pushing myself, I really should decide this. I think it should be this. And then, yes, I go to bed at night, I've made up my mind. I'm going to do this or I'm not going to do it, whatever it is. And you wake up in the morning and the old view is back with a vengeance. And there's in this polarity of the view, I should or I shouldn't. What's going on inwardly? The idea of choice is essentially, let's say, take the view, is movement of mind. More movement of mind, more ideas of choice. And we, like the consumerism, have been exploited to the nth degree to get our mind to keep moving, to keep being active, to create more choices. And the world cannot take human beings. We don't have the resources to fulfill all the choices that we keep producing there. So if choices reveals a tremendous amount of movement of mind and energy, memory, views and opinions going into those choices, which keep feeding them, and therefore the indecision, we might afterwards, ego in its claim, well, I have struggled with this one, for a long time. Couldn't make up my mind, but then suddenly I realized what I need to do, etc. It sounds one's really in control of the situation. Myth. Either one got so exhausted one just settled for one, or one just thought that little bit more about one than the other, and that was the one that one took. But one doesn't want to say that to one's friends, that one's mind is all over the shop and one was too tired, so decided to die. So one might come to, well, it was a struggle, but I came to a real resolution, etc. Have I touched a button over there? No. Oh, the voice. We're not English, I hear this voice when I go back there. It's you have to be a bodhisattva to live in Britain these days. All right. Not that I'm claiming to be so. Anyway, so sometimes with all of this, it's a different kind of way. Rather than trying to think it through because it's extremism, we want to be interested in what the middle way is with regard to that, and a contribution to that will be grounding, mindfulness, meditation, calmness of the being, and most important, not as an end, but to listen to the deep. Choices, going backwards and forwards, is superficial. It's not a reflection of the deep for us. And sometimes in the singularity of the deep, we will know what to do. And it does happen, and I hear it regularly enough, and a tremendous credit, those of you here and elsewhere, of the authenticity of struggle. I think there's a real valid place in life for struggle. I don't want us to dismiss it. And sometimes it is a genuine struggle with events, choice events and so forth. But it can be that in that dynamic, in that struggle, whatever it might be, that something of the deep, because things are shaken up so much, something of the deep comes through, and out of that some authority comes. And sometimes the struggle is fairly major. A very good friend of mine, Dharma teacher, a precious Dharma teacher, has cancer, severe cancer, life-threatening cancer. And he's got access through the networks of friends to the finest oncologists available. One oncologist says to him, you have to continue taking the chemotherapy. You have to continue this treatment. He's already lost most of his pancreas, which is one of the most dangerous of the cancer. You have to continue with this treatment. Do not stop at this stage. The other oncologist, with great authority, very well respected, says you have to stop this treatment. It's killing you. You have to have a break from it. Two significant voices, and your life is on the edge. That isn't easy to resolve. That isn't easy to say yes to this and no to that. And sometimes in life we can be right on the edge of those critical choices, and it takes some quiet authority with frequently stated reminder to all of us in life, with the initiatives that we have, with the middle way that we have, nevertheless, we cannot guarantee the outcome. Whatever it might be about, we cannot be assured of the outcome of the consequences there. But we try to find the deep. We listen deeply. We're willing to struggle over our decision. They may well, in some cases, be superficial, but some may be very deep in the being. And we want to listen to the deep singularity of the voice. And it's remarkable with the depths of meditation and the depths of insight, how well we can live without choice. It's the deep which is doing the talking. It's the deep which is moving the being. And there's very little movement with that. Therefore, very little wavering backwards and forwards, either this or that. And part of these, an essential feature, not part, an essential feature of the teaching is to listen to the deep and respond, and that response moves itself through the vastness of the middle way. Worth staying with. Okay, thanks for lending in here. Let's have a quiet moment or two, shall we? May all beings explore the middle way. May all beings appreciate the joys and insights that can emerge from the expanse of the middle way. May all beings engage in the fullness of things. Thank you very much. The time's just coming up to 10 to 5. Sitting, standing, walking, reclining, 4 choices. And there are also 5, there are some one-to-ones as well.
There aren't any choices.
There aren't any choices. All right, fair enough, thank you. Okay. Thank you, everyone. Yes, it'll be up. Yeah, you do. So, when I catch you, we'll talk a bit.